Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Bye.
All right. Today we are going to begin our short study on the book of Ruth. And as we're doing this study, my information is going to come, of course, from the Bible and from the book Bethlehem Road, which was written by Michael Whitworth. I have studied this, and I know some people at church have studied this, and I enjoyed it. And he actually, I think, wrote another book, and it's called Start to Finish Ruth, and that's my favorite. And I can't find it. I have searched for 2 years, so I don't know if it got lost in the move, if I've let somebody borrow it, if I gave it to somebody. But that is my ultimate favorite book, a book that I actually did a Bible study from, or did a class from, and I can't find it. So Bethlehem Road is another good one, and that's the one that I will be referencing the next few weeks while we do this study. And I hope you all find this study interesting, and my hope is that everyone can take something away from each devotional in this series. So we're just going to do the first 5 verses today. We're not going to bog down. I'm not in any hurry to finish this. My first goal was to do 1 chapter a week, and there's a lot of information in the first 5 verses. So I quickly changed my mind about that. So we are just going to take it a week at a time. I think this week is verses 1 through 5, and I think next week is 6 through 10. I will have to double check on that, but we will pick up in verse 6 next week of chapter 1. So we are just going to see how far we get each week, and then I will try my best at the end to tell you what to study for next week in case you want to study for it. Let's begin with the book of Ruth. We do not know who wrote Ruth, and we are unsure of when this book was written, because if you don't know who wrote it, then you don't know when they lived, what was going on. But because of certain events that happened in this book, and we think that it takes place during the time of Judges, which that falls in the period of 1300 to 1050 BC. So we're in the middle of the cycle of good judge, bad judge, bad judge, or good ruler, bad ruler. And we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. But let's read verses 1 through 5. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judea. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. Verse 5. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left with her 2 sons and her husband. All right. Hopefully you all read that a little bit smoother than I did. In verse 1, we see that it says, in the days the judges ruled. So that is where people think, or where people get, that the book of Ruth was written during the time of Judges. And during this time, it was not a fun time. It was a dark time, a time filled with social and religious chaos. This is during the time when the people could not decide what they wanted. They would have a ruler or a judge, and they would obey him for a little while, and then they would turn to idols and become corrupt. Then came a bad foreign ruler or a foreign king. Then the people cried out to God to help them, and God would. He would send them a good ruler or a good judge, but the people would only remain obedient for short periods of time. And this cycle happens all throughout the book of Judges. They never learned. They had a good ruler who got rid of all the idols. They obeyed him for a little bit, and then they rebelled against him and turned against him, and they had got what they wanted. God gave them what they wanted, a ruler that worshipped idols, a ruler that was not obedient to his word. Then they were all happy for a little while, but then they came to their senses and realized, hey, this is not the right way. We're not living the right way. Please, God, give us somebody else. Give us another ruler. And God did, time and time and time again. So if this is something that, when I was studying this time, like I said, I've studied this before, but each time you study something, you learn something new. And the thing I learned new just from that right there, just from when it says Ruth took place in the time of Judges was that look how often God gave his people chances. It wasn't one chance and you're done. It wasn't 3 strikes and you're out. They did it over and over and over and over again. But yet God still helped them. God gave them what they wanted. Same applies to us. God is there. God gives us what we want. May not be how we want it when we want it, but he is there for us time and time and time again. We see this cycle through the book of Judges. And this is the time when, like we said, Ruth takes place. So it's happening during a place of unrest and chaos. The book of Ruth gives us a glimpse of the hidden work of God during the worst times. No matter how bad things get, no situation is ever beyond God's ability to redeem it. That is an important lesson for us today. If you don't take anything else away, no matter how bad things get, there's no situation that is beyond God's control. Nothing. And I think we're seeing this, we're going on, I don't know how many months. I know March will be a year. So during this long pandemic we're enduring, we must not forget that nothing is too big for God and he can redeem anything he chooses to. So yes, we all, I'm sure many of us have prayed, find a cure, take this pandemic away, make things normal again. And yet, like I said, we're going on almost a year. We're on God's time. It's not time yet, but we have to trust that God will take care of us. And God is always there, even in the midst of all this chaos, in the midst of everything changing, God is there. So all that happens in verse 1. In verse 2, we're introduced to Elimelech, Naomi, and their 2 sons. They are Ephrathites, which means well-to-do or a well-respected family. We see there is a famine going on in the land, which is the reason Elimelech decided to take his family and leave Bethlehem of Judah and go to Moab. Now, that was my understanding. We don't really know why Elimelech left. It just says he did. To me, it makes sense. There's a famine in the land. We're running out of food, running out of water. We're going to leave. And he chose to go to Moab. And Moab is a place that had all these resources. So that may not have been the reason. He may have left because of something else. It says he was well-to-do. He was a well-respected family. We really don't know the reason he left. We just know he left. And in verse 1, it says they were sojourning. And that's a key word there, sojourning. And I always thought, okay, they packed up. They were getting ready to leave. They were going to go. Elimelech was just going to go and move his family to Moab. No, that key word sojourning changes that whole idea. Sojourning means you're just going to go and stay for a little while. So Elimelech did not intend to stay in Moab. We don't know how long. We don't know if he was just going to pass through and he stopped there. We don't know if he was just going to go there till the famine was over. We don't know. We just know that Elimelech's plan was not to stay in Moab. But as we see later, his plan did not go the way he thought it would. In verse 3, we see that Elimelech died and left Naomi with her 2 sons. Now, some of us know how Naomi was feeling. We've all suffered death. Naomi just lost her husband. She's not in her homeland. She does still have her 2 sons, for now. She had to be sad and wondering what she was going to do. It was not her idea to leave. It was her husband's. She obeyed her husband, which is what you were supposed to do. She went with him. She took her family. Now he's dead. He's dead. So what is she to do? And I can just picture myself in this situation. If something happened to my husband, I've got my 2 kids. What do I do? Am I going to stay in this land where I know nobody? Or am I going to go back to my homeland where I at least had friends? Am I going to just leave that place and go somewhere new to leave all the bad memories? What are you going to do? Picture yourself in Naomi's shoes. She just lost her husband. She's mourning. She has no friends. She has nobody to turn to. What is she to do? In verse 4, we see the 2 sons. They find themselves wives. That's what they do. And they find them in Moab. And it tells us that one was named Orpah and the other Ruth. And in verse 5, we see they died. So there again, we've got 2 wives now that have just lost their husbands. And we've got Naomi who has lost her husband. So we have 3 widows. And none of them are in their hometown. They do not have a male to take care of them or provide for them. Now what are they to do? Not only did Naomi lose her husband 5 or so years before now, she lost both sons together same time. Losing one child at a time is hard enough. Could you imagine losing two at the same time? Now she's just left with her two daughters-in-law, and I can just see the weight on Naomi's shoulders. She is mourning, and yet now she must be strong and supportive of her daughters-in-law who are grieving at the same time. That takes a strong person. I do not know if I could do it. And this leads into the relationship. And we know that Ruth and Naomi had a good relationship. And Orpah, we don't know. I'm assuming no, because she ran back to, she stayed. When she had the chance to leave, she left. And we'll see that later. But it would be different if these were her daughters instead of daughters-in-law. But she still has the responsibility. Well, so she thinks the responsibility to take care of them. She's with them. She has some type of bond with them, whether it be a strong bond or a weak bond, but they were married to her sons. Now, there were no grandchildren, so you didn't have to worry about that, but she could just feel the weight. And I'm sure she's thinking, what next? I've left my hometown. I've lost my husband. I've lost my sons. I'm with my two daughter-in-laws. What now? And that's where we're going to stop. And we are going to look at verses 6 through 18 of chapter 1 next week. And the thing I want us to get from these 5 verses is that godly people do experience unexpected tragedies, and sometimes in rapid succession. Look at Naomi. Godly person. We don't have any reference to where she wasn't a Christian, was not obedient to God, was not obedient to her family, didn't love her family. She's a great example, and yet bad things happen. And we've all heard the saying, why do bad things happen to good people? Can't answer that. But this is an example. It's happened since the beginning. It happened to Naomi. And, we've heard the saying before, when it rains, it pours. And I think Naomi's feeling that way right now. When it rains, it pours. First she loses her husband, now she loses her 2 sons. What next? And sometimes we feel like that, don't we? It just seems like one thing after another happens. We can never get ahead. It's just a terrible day. And I think this is how Naomi is feeling right about now. I'm sure she's wondering, what next? And as we study the book of Ruth, we will see how she handles these tragedies and how things work out or don't work out. Just like Elimelech, he had plans just to sojourn. He did not want to stay in Moab, but they got there and he really didn't sojourn. He died. So sometimes, no matter how we have our plan of life, how we think things are going to work out, we can have step 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to happen this way, this way, this way. It may not happen that way. If it does happen that way, you are very, very lucky. I can't tell you how many times we have set out life plans, especially when you first get married. In the first 5 years, we're going to do this. Well, the first 5 years for us, we pretty much did that. We didn't have any children, and we did that. Well, we didn't have Elizabeth when we thought we were going to have her, and she came a little bit later. So when she came, things still kind of worked out. She kind of threw a kink in things, but we worked it out. Well, bringing it to today, schooling Elizabeth, I have my week planned out. Do you think we actually get that schedule down pat? No. And we've been doing it since August now. Think about the meal plan I talked about last week, where we sit down and we make a list, and we're going to have this meal Monday and this meal Tuesday, and we have it all planned out. This is what we're going to do. Well, what if somebody gets sick? What if, like we had this week, what if we have a funeral and we're not home for one of those meal times? Or what if we have a family emergency? Or what if we get called out of town, or our job sends us somewhere, or we have an unexpected meeting that pops up and it's just easier to run through the drive-thru on the way home? Sometimes our plans don't work out. It's what we do when they don't work out. And the book of Ruth, and just the example of Naomi and how she handles things when things don't work out as planned, and that everything's going to be okay. So as I end, I'm going to leave you with this thought. I want us all to remember that there will be tragedies in this lifetime. There will be. It may not happen until the last 10 years of your life. It may hit the first 10 years of your life. It may hit in the middle when you're in your 30s. You are going to have a tragedy. How are we going to respond to those tragedies? I hope we turn to our Christian friends. I hope we turn to God. I hope we do all those things that we're supposed to do, and know that people are here for you and praying for you and will do whatever they can. And like I said, I think the book of Ruth is a good example when things get hard, when we don't know where our next meal is going to come from, when we don't know what tomorrow holds, when we don't know how we're going to get through a certain situation. I think we can look at the book of Ruth and be reminded that God is always faithful. So again, next week we will start in verse 6 and we will go through verse 18. I will stick to that for this week. We won't go any farther. Some weeks we may go farther than what I intend, but next week we will just do verses 6 through 18. So I hope you all have a great week. I hope your new year is off to a good start, and I will see you all here next week.